What's up everybody, I'm Scott from Stringjoy, and today I'm coming to you to talk about how to adjust the intonation on any electric guitar or bass. It's going to be all pretty similar. We're going to cover the basics today so that you know when you're restringing your guitar how to make sure it's going to play nice and evenly and in tune all the way up the fretboard. For whatever reason, intonation seems to be one of those things that a lot of players don't mess with. I'm not sure if they're scared of doing it or just don't know what they need to do, but it's really simple, and honestly, playing on a perfectly intonated guitar is an amazing thing. A lot of players, myself included when I was starting out, just get used to playing on guitars that aren't intonated all that well, and some other players I think are just soloing and doing a lot of bending higher up on the fretboard, so they seem to notice it a little bit less since they're always using a lot of vibrato on those notes or doing big bends on them. But if you can, it's always worth adjusting your intonation. Anytime you change a gauge of string or a brand of string, they're going to intonate a little bit differently. A lot of people will, change to our brand or change from our brand to something else or whatever, and I'll hear from folks saying like, these intonated poorly. It's like, well, there's not necessarily poor intonation of a string, it's just not adjusted right. Every string kind of has its own little balance that it needs to have in order to play perfectly in tune all the way up the fretboard, and with a couple of turns of a screwdriver we can get it there. Now this brings up a fun little side note I always like to mention. When we talk about like multi-scale guitars, and we did a video about those if you are unfamiliar, but I like to throw out the factoid to a lot of players because they don't think about it, that all guitars are technically multi-scale guitars. All of your individual strings have slightly different scales. That's what we use our saddles, even on, on an acoustic guitar, that saddle's at a slant in order to adjust the scale ever so slightly of every string, because every string at a given tuning and a given gauge needs a slightly different length of string in order to intonate perfectly on your guitar. So we generally make those adjustable on electric guitars and electric basses so that we can adjust those for each gauge of string and for your player preferences to ensure that your guitar is going to play nice and in tune. Now this is a pretty simple process, but there are a couple of core things that you're going to need. One is a fresh set of strings. I'm going to use our Broadways here, which is our round core pure nickel line. But you could use any strings that you want. They certainly don't have to be ours. I do, however, recommend adjusting intonation with a new set of strings. As you pull strings out of tension, as you continue playing them, bending them, they get sweat and corrosion and all that sort of stuff on them, that will adjust how they intonate. And you don't really want to adjust your intonation with an older, dead, or otherwise lacking set of strings. You want to do it to a nice, fresh, new set of strings. That way, when you put that same string set on fresh the next time, it's going to intonate right for the most part again. So you need fresh strings. You also need a screwdriver. I highly recommend a smaller screwdriver, especially if you have a guitar that has Phillips head. Some guitars use flathead, some use Phillips head. I messed up a lot of guitars when I was a kid by working on them and using big Phillips head screwdrivers I could find from my dad's tool shop, and stripping out the little tiny screws in a guitar. So if you can, spend $5 from Amazon or whatever and get yourself a little set of tiny screwdrivers that'll work really well. You're going to want to put those to use, and they're going to work really easily for you. The third and final thing that you always want to have on hand when you're adjusting your intonation is a tuner. I've got a little pedal tuner on my pedal board down beneath me. You can use a tuner on your phone. I highly recommend the Pano tuner. That's what one of my winders hipped me to recently. I'd been using Guitar Tuna, the app, and it wasn't really all that precise. The Pano one's really cool because you can take it and adjust how tightly it evaluates your tune. So I have it down to like 2 cents as how closely it monitors, and that's really helpful to get this just right. But any tuner will work as long as you can kind of adjust it and make sure that you're getting everything as in tune as you want it to be. So before we jump in, I'm going to throw this fresh set of Stringjoys on this Fender Strat. I will stretch them ever so slightly, not too much. You don't want to pull too much on your strings before intonating them, or really in general, to make sure that everything's holding tune right, and then I'll circle back up with you and I'll show you how to adjust your intonation. All right, so we are all strung up with a fresh set of strings on here. Everything's been stretched and tuned. We might have to retune a little bit, as always kind of happens with the early stages of a fresh set of strings, but hopefully not all that much. So what we're going to be looking at here is tuning the string, checking the 12th fret harmonic, which you should know how to hit. It's just placing your finger lightly above that 12th fret, and comparing that harmonic to the tuning of the string fretted at the 12th fret. Now I'm going to use my handy screwdriver that I mentioned earlier back at the screw at the back of this bridge in order to move this saddle either backwards or forwards. The way that this is set, if I go clockwise, that's going to move the saddle backwards. If I go counterclockwise, it'll move it forwards. The screws are at the back here on this Fender style bridge. On a Tune-o-matic bridge, sometimes they're on the front. The process is still exactly the same. All you really have to do is kind of move it one way and see which way it moves if you're ever kind of worried about which way is the right way to move it. Now, I have a really tough time remembering this all the time, but what you need to do here is if the fretted note is sharp, we're going to move the saddle back a little bit, creating a longer scale length. Likewise, if the fretted note is flat, we're going to move the saddle forward a little bit, shortening the scale length ever so slightly. And so that's what we're going to do to kind of get started. Let's go ahead and listen in. See what we're doing at here. All right, I'm going to tune this harmonic of that low E. There we go, that's perfect. And then I'm going to fret it. So we're actually almost just right here. We're a little bit sharp, so I'm going to move this back just a skosh. When I do that, I have to retune because I changed the scale length of the string. Perfect. So it's that easy, just a little turn of a screw. It might be more further off depending on where your string's at. Let's do another for kicks. All right, that's our A. Nice and in tune on the harmonic, and let's fret it. Same story, a little bit sharp. So all we're going to do is take this a few turns clockwise, not many, to move it a little further back. We retune again, check the harmonic, check the fretted note. Oh, that's perfect. What luck. All right, let's move on to the D. Nice and in tune. Fretted, again, just a little bit sharp. Still a little bit sharp, so we'll keep moving it back a little bit more. I know that watching somebody else do this on video must be about as exciting as watching paint dry, but that's the only way you learn, I guess. All right, perfect. Now our D's perfectly in tune. So that fast, we got these bottom three strings in perfect intonation. Let's continue moving up. I'm just tuning this guy. It's a little finicky. Again, we're just sharp on everything right now. I did go with a slightly lighter gauge of string than I usually do, and that could definitely be affecting things ever so slightly. Dead on. So after all that tuning, we really didn't have to do all that much to it. All right, let's check our B. Perfect. Honestly, plain strings tend to move around quite a bit less. So if your plain strings are good, you're mostly in good shape except for this high E. Let's double check that. This is coming in a little bit sharp for me, but I want to make sure I have it perfectly in tune. All right. Still a little bit sharp. Let's just take that a little bit back. Retune. Still a little bit sharp. This is a little bit unusual. Usually you want your high string kind of way forward. But if this is what it takes to get it playing perfect, that's what we'll do. Perfect. All right, and just like that, I mean, we didn't speed this up or anything. That was real time. Really just took a minute. And I haven't actually ever messed with this bridge before. It's just been the way it was since I bought it. So it's not like I had it perfect and then just screwed it all up just a little bit to make it look easy. It really was that easy. There wasn't a lot of work involved, and now we're perfectly there. Again, you might have to approach this from the front if you're using a Tune-o-matic bridge or use a flathead screwdriver. Everything will differ a little bit. Bass bridges usually look just like this with a screw at the back. But those are just really tiny differences. In general, this is kind of the technique, and it's all you really need to know. So it was that easy and that simple. I really hope this is something that you can learn and just add into your string changing routine. It's super simple, really doesn't take a lot of technique, but it will ensure that you have a great playing guitar all the time. And again, especially when you're changing string gauges ever so slightly, a little turn of a screw here or there will get everything sounding great. And if you do a good job, you will have nice and well intonated bar chords all across the neck of the guitar, which just makes playing really easy and is a little bit easier on the ear as well. So I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to hit up our support team. That is what we're here for. Support@stringjoy.com is how you get a hold of them. And leave a comment below if you have any questions we can answer here. All right, thanks y'all.